Are you like in an empty auditorium? Is that what's going on though?
Yes.
That's good.
The only office space that I could find that was both socially distanced and affordable was a middle school auditorium.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
In rural.
They got to do something with space. So that's great.
Yeah.
Good for them. So let me get your last name right. It's Kocher.
It's Kocher with like a hard K sound.
Yeah, you and Charles Cook need to get together and have some sort of, figure this out.
It's one of those hard to pronounce foreign names.
Mm-hmm.
It's because my family were immigrants back in the day. So.
Yeah, well, this is America. And do you have a different first name? Is it like Austino? And
No.
You've Americanized just the first name? What is Kocher? What is that? What kind of name is that?
It's German, and the root word is from the word for cooking. So kochen is to cook in German.
Oh,
so,
right.
Yeah.
Whenabouts did your family make their way over to this country?
Late 1700s, mid 1800s. Mm-hmm. One of my forefathers was a Swiss Mennonite fleeing oppression in Switzerland.
Nice.
In the late 1700s. So that's fun. And then other parts of my family came during the political upheaval of the mid 1800s. Yeah.
Stephen's just doing a Nazi check.
Yeah. I was screening for grounds of inadmissibility relating to the Nazi genocide of 1930. What are the years on the form? 1935 to 1945 or whatever it is. Anyways.
Everything that my family has done, we've done in America. So.
Fantastic. That's the American way.
Yeah.
We do, for the non-immigration lawyers, we do have to ask all our clients when they're applying for green cards if they participated in the Holocaust. And so,
yes.
Matthew, have you ever had an immigration officer ask the question at the interview for somebody who was not born yet during World War II? I've had that happen
all the time.
I
mean, there's some officers who like skip the questions and they go to like the relevant ones.
Right.
Then there are some officers who read every single one.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I'm like sitting in the back, rolling my eyes. Like that's when I get out my phone and I start playing games.
Counsel,
actually, I start playing games at the beginning of the interview, to be honest. But
I can just picture Matthew like walking into the door frame of the officer's office because he's playing Candy Crush and can't be bothered to look up. Hold on, I'm almost done with this game. I can't do a Philly accent, but someday I'll learn it and I'll do the show without you.
You should. It'll be awesome.
Now, Austin, tell people about yourself. Who are you? What are you all about? What are you doing? Why are you here?
So I am a researcher at TRAC, Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, which is a mouthful. I am a geographer by training, and I've spent the last 11 years now studying the immigration enforcement system, basically everything from the first time someone comes in contact with a law enforcement officer all the way through the deportation process until they are deported or if they get other forms of relief. So that's my research area. And because TRAC focuses so much on immigration, although we do lots of other things, that's sort of my specialization at TRAC, is looking at the immigration data and talking about things we see from new data we get from the government. So TRAC has been around since 1989, so a little over 30 years. And TRAC's mission is basically to make data that the government has about itself available for the public, with the rationale that when federal agencies, when they're the only ones who have access to their data, they are the ones who get to tell the story.
Right.
When you make the data available for other people, then when that story is, as it of course never is, driven by political priorities and not factual ones, we make that data available so people can see the data and can understand what the reality is behind the scenes.
Now, who's providing this information to you? Are you guys going around scooping it up, or is it actually handed over by the federal government?
We get all of our data from the federal government directly. We use Freedom of Information Act requests, which allows anyone really to ask the federal government for information that it has. And the information is required to be turned over with some caveats for things like national security and privacy. And a lot of people use FOIA to obtain documents that are of interest for whatever reason. We don't actually get documents from the federal government, though. We get entire data sets from the federal government. So they come directly to us already in digital form. And, over the last 30 years, we've developed a specialization in being able to look at that data, to clean it up, to make it sort of legible for the public. This is not data that we go around asking people what they think. This is data that comes directly from the federal government.
I know, with immigration practitioners, one thing that we look at mostly in TRAC is the asylum grant rates for IJs. One thing I always wanted to know is, well, one, how do you get to it specifically for each judge? Is that in the data that you just spoke about? And does it also reflect things like withholding and CAT, or is it purely asylum?
Great question. That is probably the thing that I get the most questions about from practitioners. That is right in the data itself. So we get a snapshot of all of the cases and all of the proceedings from the EOIR, the Executive Office for Immigration Review, that manages and oversees the immigration court system in this country. So we get a snapshot of their database every single month. So we have really current data on that. And in that data are information related to each individual immigration judge as well. So when there is an outcome in those cases, it's also tagged to a judge. So you really are seeing what the immigration court has. With asylum-related cases, the way that we've managed it is, so let's say a case goes through and there's an asylum grant or an outcome of some kind, there's three options. That person can get asylum, they can get some other form of relief, or they can get a denial. That's how it works in our system. Now, legally, it's a little bit more complicated than that, right? Because there's multiple forms of relief. Technically, there are forms of relief that someone will get, and it's also actually a denial. You may get denied asylum, but you get withholding. So we put that in the bucket of other form of relief rather than denial. But we're aware that there is some slipperiness there between those categories, but that's how we break it out. Yeah.
So I imagine you guys are just FOIA-ing all day long, constantly. I imagine a relationship developing over time, kind of like if you go to your favorite coffee shop and they start making your drink without even ordering. They know what's about to come. And I'm wondering if you developed any kind of working relationship like that with the agency, and how, if at all, that relationship might have changed over the last few years.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, it's like a relationship with a coffee shop. If a federal judge orders the coffee shop to have your coffee ready for you, because they don't want to give it to you in the first place. So there is a relationship there. All of these agencies have FOIA officers who manage the request. And because we're sending out dozens, certainly over 100 FOIA requests every single month to agencies, most agencies sort of know us and recognize when things come in as being from TRAC. Our FOIAs are also, at this point, very standard. So we're asking for the same data on a regular basis. We've taken the time to understand how the data is structured. So we're asking for very specific things. We're not really fishing around for the most part because we know what we're looking for. So in a sense, our FOIA requests come in pretty straightforward. On the other hand, there's a lot of them and they come in frequently. So there is a relationship there, and that relationship is better or worse. In fact, up until quite recently, even currently, we have a pretty good relationship with the FOIA officers at the EOIR. I mean, there's some really good people there. And until recently, really until this last administration, EOIR has never been fantastic to work with because no agency loves having public oversight. But they've generally been really non-political and just sort of, interested in getting the job done. That has changed in recent years. Some of the data we get, like the regular data from the EOIR, we actually had to sue for originally because they didn't want to provide it. So we get that data in some of our other data sets as well. We get them because of a standing court order that requires the agency to provide us that data. So even having the level of granularity and immigration data that we have now, it's common enough and most people know it now. Sort of people know where to go and they can look at asylum grant rates and you can look at some of that data. But a lot of that data took 10 years FOIA requests and fishing around and trying to understand how the data was structured and litigating to finally get it. So we kind of have a smooth, functioning machine now, but it took a lot of work.
I see.
No, I know some of the immigration courts I work with can barely keep track of cases that they've scheduled themselves. So I imagine a lot of this data is it confusing? Does it come in haphazard? Because, this is what I see from immigration courts, that they're not the most organized courts in our system.
Sure. Yes. So there is a degree of messiness in the data overall. There's some things that we get data on that we don't report on. So you'll notice that we don't report on things like gender when it comes to the asylum cases and a lot of our tools. And it's because gender is one of those fields that's not consistently filled out in a way that we're able to share. That's just an example. So yeah, there is a lot of messiness there that we've sorted through over time. I would say there are some things that are messy and there's some things that aren't. So, it's the kind of thing, if we were to hand off a monthly snapshot of data to a new researcher and say, tell us what you can find, it would be really hard to figure out which parts are reliable and which parts aren't. We kind of have a system for checking now, and we've built programs into our data system that we run every month to automatically go through and check and flag things for us if there are issues and things like that. And so we are constantly checking that and reporting on the things that we feel confident about. But just to give you an example, the reason why this is so important, it's so important to run those kinds of checks, is that at the end of last year, we found that there were hundreds of thousands of immigration cases that had previously been in the court's data system that had completely disappeared. And this is a huge deal. So, and we were really concerned, not just that we wouldn't be able to make good data available to the public, but our more fundamental concern was if the EOIR, either intentionally or just through sloppiness and incompetence, were mismanaging this huge data system that is managing 1.2 million cases in the backlog. If they're mismanaging cases, if they're deleting records, if they're losing records, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong when you're managing that size of data system. If they're screwing that up in some way, it's not just that we can't update our tools, it's that Congress can't provide meaningful oversight. It means they're not going to be able to know what's going on within the courts. And so we raise that as a concern because we do these kinds of checks.
Right.
And so that's exactly why it's so important to know which are the messy parts, to understand how the data is structured and keep tabs on it. It's a good example of why I think it's important that an organization like TRAC exists.
Yeah, Steve, have you ever had the experience of sitting down for a case and an immigration judge looking at you and saying, so what are we doing here? It's like,
oh yeah,
we're doing a cancellation. Like, oh, what is it, permanent resident or non-permanent? It's like, okay. So yeah. So I'm not surprised.
I will say I've only had the best experience in the immigration court.
I'm only relaying experiences from other people.
Oh, right.
Like Steven, it's been spectacular.
Or with now retired judges.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's definitely happened. And it's a lot of work, and it's hard to know. There was a judge we had in Seattle who's now retired, and I know from conversations I've had with his former clerk that before every master calendar hearing, he went through all the files. He checked exactly what was going on. And you could tell when you went to a master calendar hearing, like he had a real sense of what's the latest on this case. And there are other judges who just don't put in that time. But I also think that the caseload doesn't lend itself to that type of judging. It's really, really hard or impossible to do that.
Yeah.
Now, I know you wanted to talk about COVID and how it's affected the immigration court. I want to just say, because I do love the immigration court and the immigration judges, and it's hard for me to hear you other people. My name is Stephen Robbins, by the way. My bar number is 111. No, just kidding. No, but I think that we should be a little bit gentle with any agency or government that doesn't totally get a once in 100-year pandemic response totally correct, right? None of us were really prepared for this in any meaningful way. So I think that whatever criticisms we have need to be couched in those terms. But I'm curious, what about the immigration court made them particularly unfit to handle a crisis like this?
Well, there are many answers to that are probably outside of my scope of expertise. But from our perspective, watching what has happened with the immigration courts, and because the immigration courts are also part of my sort of central wheelhouse of research, if we just step back even from the immigration courts and just sort of frankly say that the federal government has just fallen down on the job when it comes to handling the pandemic. There are parts of it that no one is going to be able to handle a pandemic perfectly, right? Pandemics happen quickly, or, no one can be perfectly prepared for this. But the president could have developed a national plan, modeled responsible public safety behavior, like wearing a mask and encouraging mask wearing, and taken this seriously from the beginning. Instead, he ignored it, downplayed it, and tweeted conspiracy theories and, peddled miracle cures instead of addressing it seriously. Now, the federal government's response for mishandling of the pandemic is one thing. The EOIR itself can't control what the rest of the federal government does. So the EOIR is operating in a context where the federal government is not really taking the pandemic seriously. So many things are outside of its control.
But I mean, I'm going to push back on that just a little bit to say that, they've closed, which is the right thing to do, right? Yes. We have a blog post up about they're not processing any cases and that they've really dropped off dramatically. But isn't that, in the context of the pandemic, the right thing to have done? We don't want them plowing forward and having master calendar hearings and forcing people to come into crowded courtrooms and things like that, right?
Oh, sure. The fact that they have closed and that there's been a drop off in hearings, that's just an observation. That's not a criticism.
I see.
Yeah.
But
hold on. There are municipal courts all over the country, and local courts, state courts that are up and running, not at full capacity.
Right.
But they're getting done. And the immigration court, the fact that they can't figure out Zoom, right. is just beyond maddening. And this is something that should have been incorporated long ago.
Right.
And it is just, I did a small municipal court hearing in Riverside, New Jersey via Zoom.
It's a total hole, people, is what he's trying to say. That was the connotation I got from your tone about Riverside, New Jersey. Is that true?
It used to be a beautiful place. It used to have a lot of Brazilian immigrants, but a bunch of racists took over and passed an ordinance that kicked all the Brazilians out, basically. But now it's a hole again. The point is that there are courts all over the country who have figured this out, and immigration courts cannot. And why is, anyone who practices in multiple jurisdictions, meaning like immigration courts, state court, federal courts, and all that, will always tell you that the immigration courts are the worst run courts. They just are. A lot of nice people work there. You'll get very professional people. But if your immigration court has more than one or two really nice professional clerks, you are lucky. You are honestly really lucky. Austin, you put in a blog post that Stephen was kind of referring to, and how this is kind of, I don't want to say upended the immigration courts, because that makes it sound like they were running well beforehand.
Right.
But it's really kind of mucked up a mucky process.
Right. So there's two pieces of this. One piece is objectively what has happened in terms of the immigration court proceedings and hearing cancellations and closures. And the other is the context around it and the things that the EOIR can control and they can't control. So something like managing the technology around holding telephonic or video hearings. That's been a long-standing issue. And like many parts of the immigration courts, like the fact that there's still no comprehensive digital filing system, that there's still an A-file case that gets shipped around the country, things like that. Those are things that require money and resources. And the context that is partly beyond the EOIR itself, strictly speaking, is the fact that administrations in US history and Congress has decided to massively overfund the enforcement wing of the immigration system and leave the immigration courts underfunded and totally incapable of dealing with the huge number of NTAs and deportation cases that the enforcement agencies are pumping out. So part of this is our funding limitations that the EOIR is not able to control, much like with the COVID-19 pandemic. They're not able to control what the rest of the federal government is doing in terms of their response. However, the EOIR is in control, or could have been in control, of establishing a clear plan in terms of court closures and reopenings, having clear criteria for when courts were going to reopen rather than just tweeting about it. They could have communicated with immigration judges. They could have worked with AILA, the association that represents immigration lawyers in the country. Despite all of the factors that are beyond the EOIR's control, they could have had a plan and developed a plan to make sure that everybody was safe and informed and on the same page when it came to what was going on with the immigration courts. Instead, they tweeted about it. They tweeted court closures past midnight. They tweeted court closures in the middle of the morning, and in general took the same sort of social media approach to managing the crisis that the president did. It was an opportunity to really build trust with their employees and their staff and with immigration attorneys and with the immigrants who are facing deportation. Instead, they went about it in a very haphazard way. And unfortunately, one of the things that we've seen from the Immigration Judges Union, even from ICE trial attorneys, is that the EOIR's handling of court closures and the entire response to the pandemic has eroded trust with their own staff and with their own judges and with attorneys and other people that they need to get their job done as an agency.
And I think what should not be understated is that this is not like a bunch of attorneys saying, I don't want to go to court. Quite frankly, I'd much rather be in court on a daily basis than be doing what I've been doing. But up in Newark, New Jersey, a private attorney died from COVID-19. The court interpreter died from COVID-19. A cleaning personnel died from COVID-19. And a court administrator, court staff died from COVID-19. An ICE trial attorney was in intensive care for a couple months, and he's still recovering. He thankfully did not die, but he has a long road back to recovery. And all these things are directly tied back to the immigration court in Newark. In New Jersey, AILA is actually suing EOIR in order for them to stop doing hearings that they have restarted and to try to move to a virtual system. So, people listening and saying, these are a bunch of whiners. No, I mean, this is life and death. And unfortunately, up in New Jersey, we have seen death. And, this is something that it's good that they halted hearings. I don't think they did it quickly enough. And my evidence would be 4 people dead in Newark. But maybe you can excuse that because it was new and people didn't know what they were doing. But they haven't done anything to get the ship rolling. And if I can posit a theory as to why, is because they don't care. They don't care if immigration courts run or not, because a big part of their strategy has been chaos. And it's like, let's ruin the system. Let's show everyone the system sucks. It's broken. You can't fix it. And it's something we have to do away with. And not do away with in maybe a positive way, like, oh, all you guys are okay, but do away with in a sense that let's just go back to more expedited removals, officers who can kind of take care of these cases. So I do think it is calculated for them not to have a plan and for them to mess it up even more than it already is. But that's my conspiratorial take.
Well, yeah, the message will be the courts don't work because people have too many rights. I mean, look at all these rights that we're giving, and that's why it's broken. Like, it has nothing to do with the fact that we don't know how email works. There's 2 things that are like really infuriating about it to me. Well, maybe 3 things. even in the detained cases. So they continue to detain people and put them through the ringer. And in those cases, attorneys can now do individual hearings by telephone. The ICE attorney gets to appear via teleconference from the comfort of their office, but they haven't quite figured out how to do a three-way teleconference. So the private bar attorney or the immigrant's attorney has to appear by telephone. Now, that's kind of a big deal that you can't see the demeanor of your client. Your client can't, signal to you in such a way that they need a break or whatever. You can't see the demeanor of the judge. And what's weird about it is, we have middle schoolers doing three-way videos to go back to school. So this doesn't seem like rocket science. And Austin, you talked about, well, it's expensive and things like that. And I can imagine developing like a secure private electronic filing system from scratch would be a major undertaking. But what about Pacer? I mean, there is a system that exists in real life with federal courts all across the country where any party to civil cases, criminal cases, bankruptcy cases can file whatever they want, whenever they want electronically. And it doesn't seem like it would have taken mountain moving for the court long ago to have said, like, we want a piece of that action, right? I mean, these tools exist is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I agree completely. And this is part of the argument of understanding what is within the agency's control. And something like this is. There are lots of things that they could do to keep the courts working. And to the point before, nobody wants to see the courts close. We've got over 1.2 million cases that are waiting to be decided. There are people who are waiting to hear about their asylum case. Nobody wants to see this happen, but it is a life and death issue for many people. And if the courts wanted to take that, seriously and use this as an opportunity to build trust and to build in a little bit of innovation, as you said, rise to the moment, use the technologies that they have, make this work. There was a lot that the courts could have done and chose not to do. Just another point on what is going on with the court closures, though. It's not just that the coronavirus pandemic is slowing the courts down, and this is going to have a huge impact on the backlog, right? Because we found that even by the end of May, almost 100,000 hearings had been canceled or postponed. That's a huge impact in a system that's already backlogged. But, there's two other factors here, which is important for people to keep in mind. One is that ICE didn't slow down in starting new cases for discretionary cases that were not the kind of priority cases or would have been priorities in the past. They filed over 110,000 new NTAs over the same period that the courts are slowing down. ICE attorneys are spending their quote unquote free time now reopening cases that were previously closed. So if the administration more broadly were serious about addressing the immigration court backlog as it's claimed to at different points, one thing would be to not continue to put more cases into the system and let the courts work through the cases that they have, which is already going to take a long time. The second point of this is we've also seen in the past year record numbers of resignations and retirements from immigration judges, either because, like I said, they reach retirement age or because they just can't stand it. They can't stand working in the system anymore because, a lot of immigration judges, they join because they care about the law. Maybe they've been an ICE attorney, maybe they've been an immigration attorney, but they think that they can make a bigger difference as a judge. And they've told me privately that this is not what they signed up for, working in this environment and having whatever discretion was left taken away from them. And what that means is that now 2/3 of the immigration judges, and the proportion is only going to get higher, 2/3 of the immigration judges who are deciding cases in this huge backlog, they've only been on the bench for 3 years. 2/3 of them. So this could have huge implications, a really big culture shift, like I said before, where you've got a judge who's really looking through the cases. The chance that that kind of culture of attention to detail and quality is going to continue in the future is something that remains to be seen.
Yeah, so in Newark, at least 3 of the new judges have no prior immigration experience whatsoever. and they're currently being trained by a judge with about a year of experience being an immigration judge who had no prior immigration law experience. So things are really looking up.
Can I ask real quick, are the resignations outpacing the new hires? Because, I mean, we've got a bunch of new judges in Seattle, but we've also had retirements and things like that. So do you have any idea who's winning that race?
They're definitely not. There are way more new hires than there are judges who are leaving.
Okay.
No, the total number of judges has gone up dramatically.
So one thing that advocates are pointing to is having a, they call it independent immigration court, one that's not tied to the Department of Justice, kind of like our bankruptcy courts, so that judges would be more independent and we wouldn't have all these like attorney general decisions coming down, completely changing the landscape of immigration law. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. The question of immigration proceedings being truly independent is a question that goes way back to, well, frankly, to the late 1800s, but it goes really clearly back to the 1940s before the Administrative Procedures Act was passed. One of the big criticisms of the deportation process in the 20s and 30s was that the officers who were deporting people were the same ones who were investigating them in the first place. So in the 1940s, there was this whole discussion around how to make removal proceedings or the deportation process more independent. And the Department of Justice actually asked for an exception, which they got initially under the Administrative Procedures Act, to not have to comply with the part of the APA that required investigative and adjudicatory functions to be separated. This process fought itself out over the 50s and 60s until we finally got the kind of sort of immigration judge position that we have today in the mid-1970s that still isn't independent. So the proposal to have an immigration court system, which is actually fully separate and distinct and supposedly insulated from more political priorities as it is today, would absolutely be, I think, an improvement, both in terms of due process and procedure for immigrants in removal proceedings, which is probably the biggest priority for me. But it would also improve all kinds of other just basic, boring federal agency administrative kinds of things, because it would make it more independent. The issue is just that deportation, whether we like it or not, exists in a really fuzzy space between foreign policy and domestic policy, and has for the last 150 years. And so it's something that's been fought about for at least the last 70 years explicitly. And so I don't know that we've reached a point in this country. We're not more sane about our immigration policy today than 80 years ago. If anything, we've gotten more irrational and more political about it. So as much as I would love to see that happen and think it would be really important, the political conditions would have to change for presidents of the United States to give up some control over the deportation process. And you can imagine the outrage that a basic independent court system that conforms with law and order principles would have among those on the right who claim to be about law and order. So,
well, I mean, actually, if Biden would win, I think there might be those of us on our side that might be saying, hey, just wait a minute and let's have a little payback. Right? Let's have an attorney general that can overturn all these things and kind of fix things. And then maybe we'll go to that. And I think that's probably likely to see, that not happening.
The irony in all of this is, I think, that if you had an independent court that was focused on high priority cases, you would actually go much further in achieving the ends that the right supposedly cares about. I mean, domestic abusers, repeat DUI offenders, these people would be, up for their hearings and out of the country very swiftly, which I'm not saying I'm for necessarily. I mean, all of these cases are different and deserve their own analysis, and et cetera, et cetera. But the reality of our current system is it's a hodgepodge, and many of those people who are high priority, according to the right, are bogged down in this system. They're getting their hearings reset till 2024. And so we want independent courts. But if you were an honest person on the right, it seems like you'd want it too. I
mean, I will have to say, having an independent court that is still administrating racist and anti-human laws, what does that really get us? I mean, There are times we go into district court with these so-called independent judges, and they're like, hey, this is what the law says, and the law sucks, so you lose.
Right.
And so I think there has to be more than just thinking, oh, we're going to have an independent court and everything's going to be better, but an independent judge who's very fair-minded will look at someone who's been here for 9 years, has 2 kids, who's a great person, who contributes to society, whose kid would suffer extremely and horrendously if they'd be deported. And the judge is going to say, I'm a fair, independent-minded judge, and this person needs to be deported, no matter what the circumstance. So I think it goes way beyond the independence of our judges, and we really have to deal with the racist laws, undermine everything, and something I don't think this country will ever do. So.
Oh, great. Yeah. Matthew lately has loved ending the shows on these like really positive notes about the apocalypse and how nothing's going to ever improve. It's a real.
But I'm right.
It's a real weekend upper.
Where's the lie? Where's the lie?
All right. Well, listen, Austin Kocher, it's been really great having you on, and we'd love to have you back on more regularly. And any parting words for our lovely audience?
No, this is great. I've been thinking a lot about how this landscape of immigration law and enforcement courts are right now. And I think if you're out there and you are a working immigration attorney right now, your life must be hell trying to deal with all of these changes and colleagues getting sick. So I don't know, kudos to all of you. And I'm impressed every day by the work that immigration attorneys do in this country, in this system.
It's true. We are impressive. Just kidding. That was a joke. No, it's true. And people need to watch out for your mental health. We're here for you, and we got to be here for each other. Don't listen to Matthew's pessimism. Everything's going to be fine when Biden gets elected. Everything's going to just get fixed.
Not true.
And we can all go back to brunch. All right. Well, Austin, we really appreciate your time today. And,
you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. Go Qs.
We'll talk to you again soon.